Hi everyone, my name is Miriam Gizani. I'm a PhD student at Oregon State University, and today I will be presenting our paper, Perception of the State of D&I and D&I Initiative in the ASF. OSS foundations promote a variety of initiatives to increase diversity and inclusion. For example, there's the ASF D&I Initiative, and there is the D&I Working Group of the Community Health Analytics of OSS Software, CHAOS project, or the Linux Foundation Software Developer Diversity and Inclusion SDDI project. However, little is known about contributors' perception of the usefulness and success of such initiatives. Our goal is to close this gap and understand contributors' perception and help guide and improve the D&I initiatives. In this paper, we answer two research questions. First, how do contributors with different backgrounds perceive the state of D&I in their OSS community? And second, how do contributors perceive D&I initiatives in their OSS communities? We focused on a single large OSS foundation, the ASF, to get the perspective of contributors in a mature OSS organization. The ASF is the world's largest OSS foundation with more than 460,000 contributors and more than 350 mature projects and initiatives. To answer our first research question, we segmented our analysis using 6 different background attributes, namely gender, education, English proficiency, seniority at the ASF, compensation, and geolocation. For the purpose of this analysis, we divided each demographic attribute, example seniority at ASF, into 2 segments. For instance, we grouped ASF contributors with low experience, less than a year, or 1 to 2 years, as junior contributors, and those with more experience, 3 to 5 years, 6 to 10 years, or more than 10 years, as senior contributors. We also grouped the participants according to their gender. For example, gender majority for the ASF contributors who identified as men, and gender minority for the ASF contributors who identified as women, non-binary, trans men, women, prefer to self-describe or not to say. As for RQ2, we investigated the extent of D&I issues and also the feedback on the D&I initiatives. We used both surveys and follow-up interviews for our data collection. The survey was composed of 6 demographic questions, 12 Likert scale items, and 1 optional open-ended question. We invited the ASF committers to participate by sending emails to every apache.org email address and shared a link through the ASF developer mailing list. We ended up receiving 624 responses, which resulted in a response rate of 8.5%, and this is relative to a community size of 7,500. After the survey, we ran 11 follow-up interviews. We used mixed methods approach for our analysis. We used ordinal logistic regression to analyze the answer to the 12 Likert scale questions. For this, we segmented the analysis based on the demographic attributes. The explanatory variables are participants' reported background attributes, such as gender, English proficiency, seniority at the ASF, etc. We also used open coding to analyze the open-ended question and interview transcripts. We categorized our Likert scale questions into 4 categories, namely role stereotyping, ability to contribute, being represented, and the code of conduct. Each category comprised of multiple questions. For instance, role stereotyping comprised of questions that regarded being seen as a parental figure or as a caretaker or feeling patronized by the members of the community. We used mixed method to respond to each RQ. First, we answer RQ1, perceptions on the state of the D&I. We start with the perceptions on role stereotyping. While women have been associated with the role stereotype of parental figure, we found that contributors who identified as gender majority and those who associate with the gender minority reported at similar rates being seen as a parental figure. So gender stereotypes of parental figure or caretakers were not significant factors for respondents who identified as gender minority. They were, however, for senior contributors, who were more likely to report feeling stereotyped in the role of a parental figure and caregiver than junior contributor. When we asked participants whether they felt patronized by other community members, contributors who identified as gender minority were 3.36 times more likely to report feeling patronized than their counterparts. And those not confident in English were 2.38 times more likely to report feeling patronized compared to contributors who were confident in English. So in our findings, feeling patronized was a significant factor for gender minority and those not confident in English. Perceptions on the ability to contribute. We found that none of the demographic attributes make a significant difference in participants' perception of having an equal chance to contribute and in finding a mentor. However, our results show a more nuanced story when it comes to questions regarding no barriers to contributing, having a solid network, and challenges in following discussion because of technical jargon. When it comes to building a solid network, gender majority were more likely to report having a solid network of peers. And only 58% of gender minority contributors agreed to the statement. This is worrisome, especially that prior research emphasizes the importance of same-gender role models, peers in building a network and sense of belonging. So here, gender was relevant in the perception of barriers that keep those in the gender minority group from contributing or building a solid network of peers. While building a solid network can be challenging for a variety of reasons, those who are not confident with their English speaking skills bear an additional communication burden. In fact, our results show that the lack of proficiency in English is significantly associated with barriers following technical discussions that include jargon, and also in creating a solid network. 74% of senior ASF contributors reported having a solid network of OSS peers, with the odds of 2.07 times higher than their junior counterparts. This can probably be explained by senior contributors' tenure and the connections built over the years. The feeling of being represented is important. Past work found that certain factors can impede the feeling of being represented, such as lack of interpersonal relationships in the community and the perception that one's voice is lost in an environment where the loudest voice prevails. Regarding the feeling of being represented in decision-making, both the seniority and English confidence attributes revealed significant differences. Seniority at the ASF was significantly associated with feeling represented in decision-making. 76% of participants who were confident in English agreed to feeling represented, compared to 56% of those who were not confident in English. This shows that language continues to be a barrier in open source, and the lack of proficiency in English was significantly associated with feeling a lack of representation in the decision-making. More than a half of volunteer contributors reported that the PMC was diverse, compared to 40% of paid contributors. And compensation was significantly associated with a feeling of a non-diverse PMC. This highlights a possible tension in the relatively new hybrid model of open source, where paid employees making contributions do not perceive that the PMC is diverse enough. Contributors' perception of D&I issues are a mixed bag. Some attest to its presence, while others feel that D&I issues are non-existent and politicized. At one end of the spectrum, some participants reported D&I issues are non-existent and that the community was diverse. For instance, S36 says diversity has rarely been an actual issue. And some preferred to stay out of the discussion. For instance, S517 reported, "I have therefore withdrawn my active participation in all of these types of usually quite loud discussions." On the other end of the spectrum, contributors reported D&I issues are prevalent because of their first-hand experience or that of others. For instance, participants who were in gender minority groups reported being affected by a biased committer selection process. For instance, I5 shared, "It took a very, very long time for me to become a committer relative to other people who became committers." A code of conduct defines the expected behavior for the project's community and has now become one of the most adopted D&I efforts in open source. We evaluated contributors' perception of the code of conduct at the ASF in terms of being aware of it and ways to apply it and whether they felt empowered by it. The majority of contributors indicated that they were aware of the code of conduct. This is probably because the code of conduct are now widely adopted in most OSS communities. When asking whether the presence of the code of conduct helped them feel safer and more empowered within their community, the compensation lens, paid versus non-paid, was the only attribute that showed a statistically significant difference. In fact, not being compensated was significantly associated with feeling empowered by the COC. Contributors had mixed feelings. Some appreciated the efforts that the ASF had undertaken to improve DNI, others were more skeptical, feeling that current efforts are focused mainly on gender and that they cause polarization. Our analysis revealed 9 categories about their feedback on the DNI initiatives and 4 categories of ways to improve this initiative. Participants reported 8 negative or criticisms and 1 positive or supportive perception. For the criticism, the participants who provided negative feedback considered that the ASF and contributors are not really aligned with the same goal. On one side, participants reported that the community is using DNI to defend their own interests as a way to fight their own fights. On the other side, participants also voiced frustrations, raising that contributors are pushing back the initiative and fighting to block DNI efforts at the ASF. One possible reason for the lack of contributor support can be that the DNI initiative is not addressing broader issues. For instance, one participant mentioned that gender is only a tiny part of the picture. So considering also other diversity aspects could be helpful. Another reason keeping contributors from being supportive is when they consider that the DNI initiative is not well managed or organized. For example, when the event frequency options are unrealistic and that discussions occurs in general in mailing lists without adequate moderation, which makes the discussion noisy, less focused, non-constructive, emotionally driven, and empathy lacking. This lack of support ends up creating division between contributors. Ideas to improve consisted in considering other aspects of diversity other than gender. Contributors also mentioned the importance of increasing rates of contributors from minority group and including and encouraging those minority groups, and also on having minority groups as speakers in event and encouraging their participation. To conclude, we investigated contributor perceptions of the state of DNI and the DNI initiative. Our findings show that in addition to gender, other lenses matter in contributors' perception of the state of DNI. For instance, seniority at the ASF, English proficiency, and compensation type. In fact, diversity is a multidimensional construct, and research needs to use a broader lens to understand the state of DNI in OSS. Future work needs to investigate how intersectionality plays a role for those who are in the minority. So other analysis could be done to understand how these factors interact. For example, how about gender minority contributors who are also not confident in English? Is their feeling of being patronized exacerbated by the interplay of stereotypes associated to both gender and English proficiency? As a conclusion, it is heartening that the ASF has committed to its DNI initiative and that the community is rooting for its success. And as one of our participants said, it is in its infancy at the ASF, but I'm glad it's happening. Thank you for watching.